I take the bar on the way.
10 months.
No.
But how much more school?
2 more semesters. This is the last year semester.
I'll actually grab it.
Good job.
Yeah, it's just
We're broadcasting now. Oh, you mean before he calls in? Yeah. I think they're probably getting that set up now. Phone call. It's probably be a bit of an introduction because it's hard to coordinate the call. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. My signature.
I think when I plug these in, it starts trying to assume that this is the microphone, and this one doesn't work. So I can't test the sound and the microphone. Do you have a set of headphones without a microphone?
Oh no, if I have headphones on, trying to assume that this is the microphone. Oh, you know what? It was actually not headphones. Yeah. With no light.
I don't even know if they're sitting at the mouth, you know, just drinking it up.
So I was like, yeah, it's like really
Yeah, right.
what actually will succeed.
Oh, that's the machinist wife.
Yeah. It's really eco.
20 years ago. Oh my God.
Did you get one?
Okay, I think that we're gonna get started, just to make sure that Tom Parker has time before something. So thank you so much for coming. I'm Victoria, and I don't know if Brayden wanted to come down as well. Okay, I'm Victoria, and I'm the two here at UC that Tom Parker has, and I really want to thank Larasa for co-sponsoring, and thank all of the community groups who co-sponsored. Really helped get this event going, has also ensured yesterday there was an emergency at the prison and there was a lockdown at the prison. So we thought that maybe Kevin might be able to call in. And even now, we're really hoping that everything stays clear so that he can call in. Someone died in the yard yesterday, so it's like so hopefully everything works out. He'll call in and basically we'll hook him up to the classroom speakers. Tom Parker is the chief investigator and is part of Kevin Cooper's legal team. Tom became a part of the case to help investigate all of the corrupt issues with Kevin's case. So Tom's going to speak to us about those issues up until Kevin calls. Everyone received a card, so if you have any questions during for Kevin, basically just feel free to write it down and raise it up, and we can collect those cards and bring them over to ask Kevin. And thank you so much for all of the tech help and for everyone's help.
Yes, thank you again for everyone for coming out today. Mr. Kevin Cooper identifies a very real problem in our country with not only the death penalty, but being wrongfully convicted and subject to being on the death penalty. Since the 1970s, there have been almost 1,500 people who have been executed in this country, and we can't say how many of these have been wrongfully convicted and then executed. There's no going back. So thank you for coming out today. Another aside or plug, as it's wrongful conviction day or wrongful conviction week, tomorrow, presenting Sacramento local folks, the director of the California Innocence Project, Justin Brooks, will be doing the final march in Sacramento on the Folly or the Frawley Bridge. I didn't put my phone in check, but it's in Sacramento tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. We have to be out there. I'm doing the final mile and meeting on Capitol steps to urge Governor Brown, really urge Governor Brown to free the wrongful or the criminal 12. So that's that, and thank you again for today.
So I wanted to introduce Tom. So I was fortunate enough to become a part of Kevin Cooper's campaign over a year ago now. Thank you. Over a year ago now. And I basically walked into a meeting where Carol and Norm Heil, Kevin Cooper's lead attorney, brought a group of us together to hear about the case of Kevin Cooper. And I couldn't believe that someone who was on death row, who is innocent, was spending so much time to express to us that it's not just about his case and it's not about the fact that he's innocent. That anyone who is on death row should not be on death row. And learning about the systematic racism that went into his trial and into his case, into the reason that he's on death row, it's not just a bad apple case, it's not just a needle in a haystack case, it's systematic the way it's working because that entire system has determined the current fate of Kevin Cooper. It's that much harder for him to have clemency, for him to be free, because that would prove that everyone on death row would need to be free. So I don't understand how he is able to focus and actually bring us together to learn about the legal issues of his case when there's so much emotional, political issues of anger to be felt with, but he makes these spaces possible. Tom actually was brought onto his legal team. Mr. Parker was brought onto his legal team to really do an investigation from the ground up on the police and prosecutorial corruption that infected the entire case and trial of Kevin. And bringing in issues of policing and prosecution into Kevin's case is hard when you are already asking for someone to be free from death row to then also decide to battle issues of policing and prosecution makes that uphill battle truly 90 degrees. So we're really, really lucky to have him here to bring some insight into the systematic issues that the death penalty is seeped in, evidentiary issues that the death penalty is seeped in, as his team is working for a clemency petition, and for, even if we can't get a clemency petition, a DNA hearing that we know would abdicate Kevin Cooper of his current fate. So I'll invite Tom to bring in all of the nuances of Kevin's case. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. What Victoria didn't mention is the work that I do now and have done for the last almost 25 years is expert witness work, primarily on wrongful convictions in homicide cases. By way of background, I spent 25 years with the FBI, retired 25 years ago, seems like yesterday, but have been doing this work since then. You might be wondering, what is an FBI agent, former FBI agent, doing working this kind of case, and especially for the defense teams? Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Years ago, during my FBI career, I was assigned to the St. Paul, Minnesota office, and had occasion to, with some other agents, to go track down a fugitive who was part of a two-man team that had murdered about a half a dozen employees of a supermarket in Houston. We found him, and I had the misfortune, or the good fortune, I guess, of, as we searched his house, we lifted up one of these tiles in the ceiling, artificial ceiling, and found the murder weapon. And I ended up going to Houston and testifying in that case. The bottom line to the case was both men were convicted. Both men were ultimately executed by the state of Texas. And to be very honest with you, that's something that stayed with me the rest of my life. One of the reasons that I selected this type of work to do. The other thing that contributed to me doing this is, while I was still with the FBI, I was on a team that went down again to the state of Texas to inspect their prisons for civil rights and human rights violations that have been reported. And at one prison, which is the Parchman State Prison in Greenville, Mississippi, it's one of those very notorious prisons that you've seen movies about. The inmates working out in the fields and very, just really bad conditions within the cells. While I'm there, the warden asked me if I'd like to see death row and see their execution chamber, and I'd never seen anything like that, so I said, sure. So we walked over to the building where it is. We walked down death row, which was like walking into the basement dungeon of a prison back in the 1300s. It was really something to see. But at the end of the hallway was a room. And when you opened the door, there was a facility inside that room that looked like the nose cone of a rocket, to be very honest with you. It looked like it was aluminum or steel or something. It had windows in it. That was their gas chamber. And so he explained to me how it worked, and kind of half joking but half serious, he says, why don't you go ahead and sit down in the chair and kind of see what it's like. So I'm an adventurous guy. And I said, sure, I'll do it. So I walked in and sat down, and as soon as I sat down, he slammed the door shut on me, joking around. In all honesty, within a matter of seconds, the room started spinning, I got dizzy, and I basically yelled out, open that door, let me out of here. That was a real epiphany for me when I realized that I'm one of the few people that has sat in that chair, had the door closed on me, and was able to get up and walk out of the death chamber. That too has stayed with me. And that's part of the reasons why I'm involved in this work. The other reason is I truly believe in our system of justice. And I don't think innocent people should be executed. I don't think innocent people should be sitting on death row. And I kind of believe I don't think anybody should be sitting on death row. I'm on the board of Death Penalty Focus. Some of you are familiar with that. We're based here in San Francisco. And we just had a fundraising dinner about 2 weeks ago down in Los Angeles, and did a very similar program where I talked about Kevin's case And then Kevin called in and talked to the group for a few minutes, and we raised more money at that event than we've raised in past events. So Kevin's a very effective fundraiser as well. One thing I need to say, just to have it on the record, I'm not affiliated with any of the groups or with the law school. I'm here strictly because of Kevin's case. Norm Heil, the lead attorney, could not make it today. He sends his regards. And of course, you all know Carol. I think Carol is involved with our team and is really a main point of contact for Kevin with us and plays a very vital role. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce you to two friends of mine from Santa Barbara that happen to be up here. Their son's over at UC Berkeley, Dr. Glenn Miller and his wife Kathy. And they asked if they could come on. Put me on the spot, come on. So here they are, glad you can make it. I came into this case 7 years ago, 2011, when Norm Heil called me and they were looking for an expert witness on homicide cases because they had really come to the realization that there were just a voluminous number of problems with Kevin's case. And they had not had any experts in the cases yet, and that's another part of the story that I'll get to in a little bit when we talk about ineffective assistance of counsel. But I said, well, I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. So I drove to Sacramento, sat down for a couple of days with them, went through the files. And after that, just cursory look, it did look like Kevin was most likely innocent. So I agreed to come onto the case, sign the necessary engagement letters and what have you. And I said, I'd really like to look through the whole case. The next thing I know, I had 68 banker's boxes full of trial transcripts, police reports, you name it, sitting on my front porch, and spent several months going through those. But that really solidified my thinking about Kevin's case. And I saw things in there that I never thought I would ever see in a homicide case. The corruption in the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the corruption in the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office was just, you couldn't miss it. It was so obvious. And what's amazing to me was how they thought they would get away with it. Unfortunately, they have for 35 years now since Kevin was convicted. It was almost 35 years, and has been sitting in that cell on death row. As Victoria said, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on the case before Kevin calls, and then because we have time afterwards, we don't want to. He has very limited time to have access to that phone, as you may know. And we want him to be able to give his full talk that he wants to give to you and answer any questions. And then I'll come back in and kind of wrap up the rest of the case after that. But on February 10th, 2005, Kevin was pulled out of his cell on death row, marched down to the execution area, and to suite rooms, plus the execution chamber, and told that his time had come. He was put into the clothes that he would be executed in. He was offered his last meal, any meetings or people that he wanted to talk to, what have you. And he waited there for hours, knowing that each minute was ticking away another part of his life. There was a stay of execution petition pending at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here in San Francisco. And 3 hours before the stroke of midnight at 12:01 a.m. He was called by one of the attorneys from the California Appellate Project, Gene Steinberg, and told that the Ninth Circuit had stayed the execution. And you can only imagine the relief that he felt at that time. There's a whole story behind that state of execution, which I'm going to try in a very high flyover sense tell you about here today. But about 5 years after that, 4 years, I'm sorry, 2009, there was another habeas corpus petition filed with the Ninth Circuit, a very contentious one. The district attorney in San Bernardino County at that time vehemently, viciously opposed this habeas petition. And there was a great deal of debate on the Ninth Circuit. And ultimately, the habeas petition was turned down. But in turning it down, one judge, the Ninth Circuit, William Fletcher, who still sits on the court, wrote a 103-page dissenting opinion as to why the turn down of that appeal was not appropriate. This dissenting opinion that he wrote is actually a roadmap to everything that went wrong in that case. It's a very, very astute observation of what's wrong with the case. Unfortunately, he was only joined in that opinion by 4 other judges who signed on with him. Ultimately, there were 6 other judges who voted to approve the petition. Actually, it was a motion to hear the case. I'm getting ahead of myself. It was a hearing en banc at that time. They needed 13 votes to approve the habeas petition. They only had 11. So it was denied. But here is a situation now where Kevin has got 11 federal appellate judges essentially agreeing with the contentions that the petition that the attorneys had filed in his case. The opening sentence in Judge Fletcher's dissenting opinion is, "The state of California may be about to execute an innocent man." That's the opening paragraph. Here's his dissenting opinion. If you're interested in it, you're interested in criminal law, it's online in many different places, and I would highly urge that you take the time, if you have the time, to read that. Shortly after this petition was denied, there was a state judge and a federal judge, both here in the Bay Area, that issued what in essence became a moratorium on the death penalty. And that put in an automatic stay, as I'm sure you know, on any more executions. For the most part, those orders are still in place. Kind of an added part to it is that with the passage of Proposition 66 back in 2016, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you aren't, that was an initiative to essentially speed up executions, to dismantle most of the appellate process. And in essence, it was a move by some attorneys and legal groups on the far right to clean out death row by starting up executions and getting them moving almost assembly line style. That's kind of on hold now because of all of the dispute and disagreement and argument over the method of lethal injection and the type of drugs that are being used. I've testified in a couple of states already where the states have tried to conceal the fact that they were illegally obtaining these drugs that are prohibited. They tried to create facts around why they needed to conceal the source of the drugs. And ultimately, in most of those cases, the state courts turned them down. In California, it's still a pending issue. There's still discussion going on. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation has actually filed several responses to the court trying to convince them to lift the moratorium, to let them use some of these banned drugs because they have been used in other states, which is kind of an interesting argument. But they've been turned down. And those moratoriums are still there. And that's really the reason that Kevin Cooper is still alive to this day. Anyway, let me tell you the story about what happened and how Kevin ended up where he is today. Going back to June the 4th of 1983, the day before, June the 3rd, Kevin was at Chino State Prison, Chino, California, east of LA. He was in there on, I believe it was a minor burglary charge, but he was serving about 18 months. And one afternoon around twilight time, he sees an opening in the fence. and looks around, nobody's around, so he grabs a jacket that was nearby, puts it on. It was getting cool in the evenings, and out he goes. He has no idea where he's at. He wanders in what he thought was a westerly direction because the sun was setting, which took him from the Chino prison into Chino Hills, and if he kept going, 100 miles later, he would have walked onto the beaches of the Pacific Ocean. He didn't really know that. Anyway, he gets into Chino Hills. It's pretty much dark at that point. He walked through fields and down little rural roads and actually fell into a canal that was about 4 feet deep with water. Got himself out of it. But as he gets into the Chino Hills area, which was very rural at that time, it was mostly little horse ranchettes, and he sees houses there. There's some hills. That's why they're named Chino Hills. He sees some hills, and he sees lights in the house. But he sees this one house that's kind of silhouetted up there, and there's no lights on. And he thinks, well, maybe that one's empty. So he works his way up to the house, gets there, looks in the windows, and realizes it is in fact empty. He finds a door open, manages to get into the house through the garage area, and decides this would be a good place to kind of hold up until the dust settles a little bit. Gets in there, sleeps. The next day, he hears a car coming up the long driveway. And obviously it scares him. He doesn't know who it is or why they're coming. So he hides in a bathroom in the back of the house. And a car comes up to the house. A woman gets out, comes in, picks up some items. It turns out she was a lady who had just moved out of the house and she'd forgotten some things. Gets back in the car and leaves. Well, he decides that that's a signal that maybe he better get out of there. So he waits until that evening, almost after dark. Heads out of the house and backtracks to where he came from. He gets out to a freeway, hitchhikes, gets a ride down to Tijuana, Mexico, is dropped off, manages to cross the border into Mexico. He has no money with him at all. Goes into a restaurant and sees a woman's purse, which he grabs. And turns out that he ended up with several rolls of quarters, which don't do you a heck of a lot of good in Mexico, unfortunately. But anyway, remember that point, though, about he had no money. The next morning, June the 5th, the father of a neighbor boy who had been staying with the Ryans that night, they had all been to a barbecue at a neighbor's ranch. They'd come back to the house about 9 o'clock, 9:30, and ultimately they all went to bed, and the neighbor boy, a friend of their son Josh, asked to stay over and did in fact stay over. There was Doug, the father, Peggy, the mother, Josh, who was 8 years old, and the sister Jessica, who was 11, and then Chris, who was about the same age as Josh. The next morning around 11:30, the boy, his name was Chris, the boy's father wonders why he hasn't come home. They were supposed to go to church. So he goes up to the house, looks in, and you can imagine what he saw. He saw the bodies, and the only way I can describe it is it was a slaughterhouse. I mean, the bodies were laying around. There was blood all over the place. It was obvious that something very, very serious had happened. The father broke into the house, realized that they were dead, runs back home, calls the sheriff's department, and they respond. The deputies start showing up. The coroner shows up very quickly. Interestingly, the crime scene in the house, in the master bedroom, the father is kneeling on the floor, badly cut up and hacked. We found out afterwards from the coroner there was a hatchet used, there was an ice pick used, there were knives used to kill them. There were over 140 chop, stab, cut wounds on all of these people. The father is on his knees, kind of leaning over the bed in what could only be described as a praying position. Peggy, the mother, is laying on the floor in what has been described as she looked like Jesus on the cross. Her arms were out like that. One leg was kind of crossed over, the other leg down at the foot level. This is what is normally called in homicide investigations evidence of staging. Those bodies didn't fall into that position. They were placed there. Jessica was in the hallway right outside the bedroom. Chris and Josh were in the master bedroom. The father found that everybody was dead except Josh was still barely alive. So calls the police, they get there, they get Josh to the hospital, and then what is supposed to be a very professional homicide investigation starts out, but gets off track very, very quickly, and definitely seems like it was intentional. Josh, when he was able to speak a day or two later, he couldn't speak vocally because his throat had been slashed, his head had been chopped in the back with a hand hatchet. He was in bad shape, but still alive. But the medical people and a detective using, he's on the phone. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because Kevin only has limited time, and we're going to switch over and let Kevin talk to all of you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parker. Okay, Kevin. Mr. Parker just paused his presentation because we know you have limited time. Can you go ahead and just start talking to see if this works? Okay, can you say something else? Okay, we can also put it in there.
This always happens.
We tested it like 10 times too. Okay. Kevin, do you mind continuing to test the speaker? No. Okay, once more.
Hey, good afternoon. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, good afternoon, y'all. I'm Kevin Cooper, and I'm calling from Death Row in San Quentin Prison. I thank all of you for attending this event, which I believe is very important to our collective humanity here in the state of California. I want to speak very quickly about a word that seems to fall on deaf ears in this country, and especially in this criminal justice system, and that word is torture. No, this country says they don't torture anyone, but they do. They torture we poor people who are on death row, the ones that are bad. And I know this person because they torture me. You know, and a lot of people don't know the definition or definitions of the word torture. And I myself didn't know it until I looked it up in the dictionary and found different definitions. But I do know that somewhere down the line, the dividing line within this country, we must all come together as a society and call torture wrong, no matter who it is committed against. Historians of torture have defined the term as extreme torment that is part of a judicial or inquisitorial process. By that I mean it's like what happened in the Spanish Inquisition. It's where they just take people and torture them before they kill them just for the hell of it. And that's what's happening to we people, poor people on death row who are strapped down to these gurneys and chairs and are tortured by these voluntary executioners until we are dead. They don't have to torture us, but they do. But it's also this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. This judicial and inquisitorial process is what executions are. You know, it's like we are psychologically tortured, we are mentally tortured, we are emotionally tortured, long before they get us in these gurneys, in these chairs, and physically torture us. You know, I looked up the definition in my poor man's dictionary, and I got 3 different definitions, and I'm sure that if you look it up online, you'll probably find more definitions than this. But the first definition I got was anguish of the body or mind. And the second definition I got was infliction of severe pain to punish or coerce. And the third definition I got is to cause suffering or to torment. Now these definitions are the truth about the reality of what is taking place inside America's death chambers to condemn people like me, who, by the way, are American citizens. And now I've noticed in speaking and learning about this stuff that torture is a very real part of the DNA of America. Can't nobody deny it. They can't deny it, but the truth of the matter it is. It's a very real part of the DNA of America. You know, and this is especially true whenever torture is inflicted on poor and minority people, and most notably in this country, black men. To understand torture in its proper context, you must understand this country. And inhumanity and torture are as American as apple pie, baseball, slavery, lynching, institutional and systemic racism, classism, sexism, oppression, Christianity, violence, white supremacy, guns, the Confederate flag, Jim Crow segregation, the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, hypocrisy, and domestic terrorism, just to name a few of the things that make America, America. Within all those things that I named, torture is there. So I hope and I pray that when you leave here, that some of you, if not all of you, will take the time and look the word torture up for yourself and find out that this is what is happening to poor and minority peoples on death row in this state, as well as within this country. So with those few things said, I would like to answer some questions and open this up to the topic. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
Can I mention about the DNA, that he has supporting DNA? I know that they are using DNA to clear people all the time now for crimes.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Richard Kerr.
Okay.
I put here the question.
Okay, so Mr. Richard Kerr is asking about the DNA that you have that would be supported in your case, and he's saying that DNA is used a lot now to help cases. And what is that?
Right.
Hello, Kevin? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. So there's a question about the DNA evidence and how that could support your case.
And it just
Right.
that
Well, I'm
should
sure
be
Mr. Parker or Tom will explain that to everyone, but it's, I want, and I have been asking for, habitual wearers, DNA testing to be done on a shirt that was found, a beige t-shirt, because I never wore the shirt. And the state will not allow that to happen, because we believe that whoever wore that shirt is the people or the person who murdered people that was wrongly convicted of. Now, it's not that complicated an issue, but it's an important issue. But the government and his team have yet to do this. So that's what I want.
We're going to go into that in more detail after Kevin's call in.
Do you want to say anything else about that?
no. It's just that it shouldn't be selectively used. You know, it should be available.
And Mr. Kerr here, he said that it shouldn't be selectively used. It should be available, and it should be available, you know, to you.
Exactly. It should be. I'm not asking for anything that anybody else has not had, or that we're not entitled to have. But it's just these particular people who are either hell bent on upholding this bogus conviction.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Or hell bent on refusing to hear my clemency plea and refuse to give it to me.
Thank you, Kevin. You're getting a lot of nods and agreement. Okay, so this question is from Evan, who helped bring the sandwiches. And then you're free, we're gonna, we did that. The question is, how do you keep your spirits up to continue the fight for justice in such a dehumanizing environment?
That's a good question. Sometimes I don't know. And that's the truth, but at other times, how could I not keep keep our spirits up and fight for justice in this inhumane system. I mean, I come from a people who struggle as our middle age, as black people and oppressed people in this country. And because I've read so much about the history, not just of African Americans, but other oppressed people here who have fought back and continue to fight back, their, I guess you can say, DNA rubbed off on me because now I'm doing what they were doing. You know, this is not easy to do, and if it was, more people in places like this would do it. But it's something that I didn't ask to do, but it fell on my lap, and I decided to do it. And I'm glad I have, because I've met so many wonderful and strong people, and continue to meet people who help encourage me to continue on with this fight. Because this is not just about me. That's what people must understand. This is about this system, which has historically and systematically executed and oppressed poor people who look just like me. Even poor white people who look like me, not because of our skin color, but because of our class. We're all poor. That's the only people who get strapped down in these gummies and chairs and tortured and murdered by the state. All poor people. So, it's just something that I do. Next question.
I actually wanted to ask you, so we have copies of some news articles about you and the petition, and then we also know that you write your own editorial.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
And I just wanted to ask you why.
Let me hang up and call back.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Let me hang up and call back, all right?
Okay,
Bye.
Does anyone need a note card to write a question that doesn't have one?
While we're waiting for Kevin to call back, let me add a little bit to his answer.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
And I'll tell you, I've interviewed a lot of people in prison for my time.
Let me hang up and call back.
And Kevin asked this about agriculture, I'll finish that in a minute.
Oh, he's not calling in yet. Oh, there he is. Okay, thank you, Kevin, for calling back.
This is Global Talent. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the California State Prison, San Quentin, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Talent.
Hey, Kevin.
So you, right.
Yeah, I wanted to just ask you about your writing and like why you decided to write, and then also if you can share a little bit about the op-ed you have coming out tomorrow.
I started to write because I had something to say, but nobody to say it. And so I said it to the paper. And then I used to think what I had to say to different people who I was in communicating with, and it just snowballed like that. That's how it started up many years ago. And then I had help learning how to become a writer. And so now I get paid to write for the website Truth, and I write other things for other people, other magazines, and I'm good. I learned to contribute. I understand now why they say the pen is mightier than the sword. Tomorrow, Nicholas Kristof from the New York Times, it's my understanding, is writing another piece, or publishing another piece about my case, fight, and present situation. What is it about? I don't know, but if anybody's read the piece we published earlier this year, if it's along those lines, then it's about trying to make the governor act before the governor leaves office, because we all believe that the governor's trying to run out the clock on this case, because he's sat on this petition, a clemency petition for 2.5 years and did nothing until Mr. Christoph published his first piece earlier this year. Then all of a sudden, they want, Senator Kamala Harris came out saying that she endorses what we're doing. And Senator Dianne Feinstein and different other people came out. And then the governor sent my attorney Norman a questionnaire, which he answered and sent back to the governor's office. And then they sent it to the state. So the state's supposed to be replied by October the 11th. But in the meantime, days are going by, this governor's term is up in January. So we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm hoping that Mr. Christoph will put some fire under the governor's ass and writing the truth. So we'll do something.
Definitely. And we actually have copies of the petition, written copies, and then also computers with the petition here. So it'd be great if we could get some more signatures on there too to contribute to that fire.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you very much.
definitely. And there's a comment actually from my aunt, who was also present when we spoke last year at the public library. My aunt and my mom are here again. And you're a very big deal to our family because one of our family members was murdered, and it's been very difficult to, in our family, the discussion of what it means, redemption and justice has always been a heavy one, and you are so inspiring because we believe in you and your life and your brothers and sisters' lives. So she says, thank you for finding the strength to continue this fight, not for you, but for all.
Thank you, I appreciate that. This is something that a lot of people don't really understand, that beauty or justice is like beauty in this country. It's in the eyes and the hands of the beholder. Like what you saw what's going on in Washington, D.C. with those people over that Judge Kavanaugh. Right? Those people don't give a damn about us. They don't give a damn about poor people. They don't give their sense of justice is altogether different than ours. Like justice for me is a new trial. At least where I can have a fair trial for the first time in all these years. But justice for other people is my torture and murder at the hands of these volunteer executioners. And depending on where you're coming from, or even your political ideology in this country, that's what your definition of justice is. But justice is not supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be Republican or Democrat, rich or poor, black or white, or Latino or whatever else. It's supposed to be justice. But this country is so messed up because of this torturous DNA in its history that justice 9 times out of 10 falls on those who have the money to get justice. So, I don't have the money, but I got the heart to fight. And luckily, I have people like Tom fighting for me, and Norman, and even you, who are attending this fit, fighting. So I like my chances.
Well, on that note, the article by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times was published at about 20 minutes ago. And so it's up. And the headline is "Justice Delayed with a Life on the Line. Governor Jerry Brown is still reviewing a murder case that advanced DNA testing could settle." So the article just went up. So if everyone wants to check that out.
It'll be in the print.
Thank you for telling me.
And it'll be in print tomorrow, Mr. Parker said. Okay, so Chris wrote 2 questions. So the first one is, can you tell us about some of the organizing that has been happening inside the prisons recently? He wrote 3 questions. Did the national prison strike have any effect on the conditions inside? And the other question here is if you can tell us a little bit more about your painting and what you want to express through your paintings, which a few people have asked about.
Oh, okay. Number 1 and number 2 is I don't know. because it didn't have any effect on death row.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Death row is housed different than general population. So we're in a different building, we have a different program, and different everything. So I really don't know what happened in general population, how the strike and all that, the protest outside, or I don't know how that happened, or how that affected the inmates on in general population. Here on death row, other than showing my solidarity with the people who were outside the front gate and with the general work stoppage going on across the country, I don't have a job, so I couldn't strike. But I did not eat the prison food. I ate what I did from inside this cage, what I had on my own, what I ate. Death row was a different, we're a different, in a different situation than general population. The only time anything affects us that affects general population is when they're taking stuff. When they're being denied stuff, we just deny it. But when they're doing stuff and getting stuff, we don't ever get it. As to my artwork, it is what it is. I paint what I paint, what I feel in my heart. I have no real messages that I want to get out because my artwork to me is more therapeutic than anything else. It helps me stay stress-free. It helps me deal with the monotony of living every day inside this 4.5 foot by 11 foot cage that I'm forced to live in against my will. It takes me out of the moment of being in here and it transports me to where inside that art, whatever I'm doing. It's just like my writing, that's what it does when I write. It transports me out of this cage into whatever I happen to be writing on a typewriter at that time. So, there's really no messages that I'm trying to give on other than I am a creator. I am a producer. I am a giver. And that's what I like to think that my work represents for me.
Thank you so much. And we have beautiful postcards of a painting that you did of Malcolm X. And we also have copies of your op-ed, Why America is Fascinated with the Death Penalty. Is that the title?
America's Morbid Fascination.
Yeah.
America's Morbid Fascination with the Death Penalty. So if people want to take a piece of your work, we have that here. And then we also have a lot of your paintings and photos of you were being streamed as Mr. Parker was talking. So we got to see a lot of your work. So thank you. So Mr. Walter Riley is here, and for the people who, the people in the room who have seen the movie Sorry to Bother You, Mr. Riley is Boots Riley's father, and we know that he's a really big advocate on your team, and that movie definitely made waves for a lot of us. So he says, "Hi Kevin, I intend to visit you. Tell us what I can do right now to help."
Well, I don't know what to tell you to do to help me personally, but I do know that we as poor people on death row need help. We need people to speak out against this horrific and historic crime against our humanity, because as soon as certain people in this state can make it so they can start their killing machine up again, they're going to do it. And they're going to strap down to these guns. Well, this prison, let me put it like this, has 2 gas chambers. It has the old gas chamber, which is still can use, and it has this new, what I call the Arnold Schwarzenegger torture death chamber that was built in secret when he was the governor, with taxpayers' money, in which they plan to use to sleep illegal injections. So we have to try to educate people, to get them to end this. The same people who are being, or will be murdered by these people, poor people, we have to get poor people out there to stand up because it could be them. You don't have to be guilty of a murder. And though I know there are people in here who are guilty. I'm not trying to say that everybody in here is innocent because they're not. But still, as human beings, and this country says they're so civilized, that they're so moral, that they're so understanding, that they're so righteous. Righteous people don't do that. Real power is not the taking of a life. Real power is the sparing of a life, the giving of a life. You know, so we need people to advocate to end the death penalty as a whole, and not just for one individual like me. I have been blessed in the fact that I have a good defense team that's helping of attorneys and people who are doing this type of work for free, like Mr. Parker Tom. He's doing this for free. You know, and Norman and the law firm Ford, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, they're doing this for free. This pro bono work, I have been blessed to have people like that. But there's a lot of guys up in here, and women on death row down here in Chelsea. Don't forget that there are women down here who are, you never hear about, who are suffering worse than we are suffering. They're being tortured worse than we are being tortured, because that's the nature of women in this country. They suffer in silence. You don't hear about them. You don't know about them. So we need people to speak out on their behalf. So Mr. Rowley, if you can speak out on their behalf and get other people to do so, man, then you're doing not just right by me, you're doing right by the world. You're doing right by our humanity. Because, like I said, this is bigger than any one person. And that's what I've learned from the people who I respect, who I look at as my leaders. You know, that this is bigger than any one person.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll do 2 questions at once. So
You
one.
have 60 seconds remaining.
Do you want to call back?
All right, let me hang up. Call back, all right? Yeah.
Oh.
Marvel lady, as you've heard, Kevin is a very, very bright, very articulate man. And
there you go.
There we go. Kevin's a very bright, very articulate man, and not only a good writer, but as you've seen, quite a good painter. Interesting, the first time I met him at the prison back in 2011, he told me, he says, you know, Tom, I kept calling him Mr. Parker, and I said, come on. I haven't called that since I left the FBI. But he said, you know, he says, I will admit, I've been a petty thief, I've been a burglar, but I've never injured or killed anybody. And after 7 years of meeting
This is Global Family. You have a prepaid call from.
I truly believe that. Here he is again.
The California State Prison, San Quentin, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. To accept this call, please or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Family.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 more calls, right? Just 1 and 1 more.
Okay. Okay. Okay, cool. I'll start doubling up on questions. So one of the questions is from a visitor who says, asks if you have a cell in your window. And then Richard Tan, who's here with a free Kevin Cooper t-shirt, asks, someone earlier asked how you keep your spirits up. I remember you told a story once about writing many, many letters before you finally met Zanetta. Could you tell that story?
No, I don't have a window with this page down there. But across the tier, and there's a gun rail, there's the windows over there, which I really can't see out, but you can, you know, sunshine, you can see the light from the sunshine come in. But no, right across from this page down there is a wall. So it has windows on either side. As for, no, that's wrong as far as how I met them. What I did was I had a lot of spiritual questions about religion and God and the death penalty and all this stuff. So I got the San Francisco newspaper in the Oakland newspaper. Now, wrote to every church in those newspapers, especially black churches, asking about God and the death penalty. Since a lot of these right-wing conservative Republicans use their religion and God to oppress us and to murder us and to execute us and to do everything they do to us. They do it in the name of God. Then they go to church and they feel real good about it. You know, I mean, I look what happened in Texas when George Bush was the governor, how he used to talk about compassionate conservatism, but yet he execute people when they go to church, and it was all good. So, you know, I wrote to all these churches, and I got one letter back, and that was from a black woman, a pastor named Jacqueline Jackson, and she was the pastor that was with me on the night that these people tried to torture and murder me, which was February the 9th, 2004. She was in a holding cage right next to the cage I was in. So that's how I met Janetta, who was the pastor. And it's important that people understand that Janetta, for the most part, is the only black person in my life, her family. She is like my spiritual rock. When I have problems understanding God, I speak to her. And because this is a Judeo-Christian society, and everything that these people do, even those people who try to put Kavanaugh on the United States Supreme Court, in their Christian genius, which I don't understand, she explains a lot of things to me that I would not understand. So I have been very blessed to meet people who can take the time out of their lives and include me in their lives and help me with the things that I need help with. Because up in here, I do not see what you see out there, but I feel the effects of what happens out there. So I have been lucky in a lot of ways like that, to meet people who come up in this modern day plantation that I'm on and help me, such as Pastor Jackson, such as Tom and Norman and everybody else who comes. Richard even came up here a couple times to visit me, which I greatly appreciate.
Thank you. And also, while we're together, I know a couple days ago we were talking, if there are any students who are interested in visiting Kevin and like learning more about death penalty defense cases, Kevin said we can get visiting forms, and anyone else who's interested in visiting, we don't necessarily get to learn a lot about just about death row and about the death penalty in school necessarily. So Kevin did extend that invitation if people want to visit him. So the next question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But what I was going to say, the reason why this is important, because many people, students too, have jobs, and if you have a job, that means you're a taxpayer. Right? And if you're a taxpayer, then this joint that I'm in, this plantation that I'm on, this death penalty that I'm experiencing, this torture that I'm going through, is all being done in your name. Every time they do something to us, they do it in your name. When they execute us, when they lock us down, when they do what they do it in your name, the name of the taxpayer. So if you are a taxpayer and you own this joint, then come up here and see what you own. And if you don't like it, then do something about it. But this is your joint. You own this. Every last single one of you who work, or your parents work, they own it, or your girlfriend, or your boyfriend, or whoever. They own this.
Now you even
that's why I want people to come up here and see. That's why I want people to come up here and see what they own. Don't you want to know what you own? All right, now my bad. You can answer this question.
No, that's very on point. And now even people interested in property law should be coming to visit. Okay, yeah. So yes. So I'll read a couple at once. So under the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, individuals convicted of a crime have the right to be free of cruel and unusual punishment while in jail. How do you respond to that? And When you learned how the current U.S. president's role in demanding the renewal of the death penalty in New York State for the Central Park Five was made even after they were exonerated, the guilty person was, in custody with exposed DNA, how does that affect you?
It affects me because Trump's a hypocrite. We all know he's the biggest liar and walking the face of the earth. He just got the power to lie behind. Everybody saw what that was. He will never admit that he's wrong. Never admit that he made a mistake. But he don't have to because the evidence points to that. There are just certain people that will never admit that they're wrong. That's like some of these district attorneys, when a man gets exonerated or a woman gets exonerated from prison or off death row, they still say that person's guilty, even though the evidence disproves their guilt. As for, how can I say it? This cruel and unusual punishment thing, I would like to use lethal injection as an example. When they first started with lethal injection, they said it was the most humane way to execute somebody. But the execution is a homicide. So therefore, that's an oxymoron because there's no humane way to commit a homicide. Right? So then when people started suffering and being tortured by lethal injection, it started being exposed. At first, the United States Supreme Court.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
The United States Supreme Court and other entities, they just ignored it. But then when it got so outrageous with this torture that people were laying on their bodies and being tortured for 2 or 3 hours at a time before they died and all this type of stuff, then these same people who said that it was humane, these lethal injection protocols, then they turned around and said, well, there's no such thing as a painless execution. Right? So they changed the game to fit their needs. So therefore, like justice being like beauty, the interpretation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution is also like that. It's in the eyes and the hands of the beholders. They're the ones that interpret the law. They're the ones that say what is cruel and unusual punishment and what is not. And as long as it's like that, and nobody will really deal with the reality of this thing being torturous, cruel and unusual punishment means torture. And as long as they won't acknowledge this torture, then they won't acknowledge this cruel and unusual punishment. And therefore we'll always have a death penalty, and that's what they want. The death penalty just by its very nature is cruel and unusual. This is what happened to me when these people wanted to murder me in 2004. Now, I got an execution date, a date that they wanted to murder me on December 17th, 2003, for a murder date of February the 10th, 2004. So between December 17th, 2003 and February the 9th, 2004, when I got that stay, these people were torturing me psychologically, just knowing that I'm going to be strapped down and have razor sharp needles put in my arm and have poison pumped into my body. That's psychologically, that was torture. Mentally, that was torture. And all the stuff that they did in between, searching the arm for veins and giving me a fresh set of clothes to be murdered and all asking me over and over if I'm one of the last to live. All this stuff is torture. This is not about just murdering somebody or taking their life. This is part of their game, their psychological game, to make you feel unworthy of life. That is torture. And there is no room in this country that claims to be the best country in the world for those type of things to happen. Not in 2018, not in the 21st century. So I understand the method to your madness. And it ain't cool. Because they only do it to people like me, or to people like you. And that's America. Next question, please.
Do we have any more questions? I also, so I wanted to end with these questions just because we'll turn back on your paintings once for Mr. Parker to finish talking about some of the specifics of your case. But I also realize I'm the only one that's gotten to talk to you. Does anyone want to come down and just say anything or comment?
I would like to make a question.
Come down. Okay. So Esteban has a question.
Hi, how are you? My name is Esteban. I would like to make you a question. After all these years that you have been in prison, being innocent about the case, how do you want the federal government? How do you believe that? Yes, go ahead. Can I speak now?
No, I can't hear your question.
Okay, my question is, after you being in prison all these years, being innocent of your case, how do you believe that the government, the federal states, the state itself needs to repair all those damages that you have been feeling for all these years?
They can't. They can't repair the damage that they did to me after me being in this prison all these years. Is that what your question? You know, they can't. No one can. If anybody could, it would be me. And the only way I can do that, and I am doing that, is to keep doing what I'm doing. You know, after I survived that near-death experience, I had post-traumatic stress disorder for a couple of years. And it took a lot of people and myself to fight to get that out of me so that the state wouldn't win. And so I continue to fight so they won't win. I hope I answered your question.
I think that was clear. There's nothing they'll be able to do to repay for this experience. It will require them completely being dismantled. But so the last
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Okay, do you want to call back and do the last question? Okay, bye.
Yeah, I got one more call. Okay, bye.
Okay, so we have one more question, and then if anyone has anything else, otherwise I think that was it.
Do you need another?
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Thank you for all of the questions. Okay.
Does anyone else need one? Okay.
Yes.
Many of you had said when I first got here that you'd like to hear more about the ins and outs of the case and some of the legal issues. So as soon as I finish with Kevin, we'll get into that.
Okay. He can.
This is Global Family. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the California State Prison, San Quentin, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Link.
Welcome.
Hello?
Hello. Okay. So you have people in this room right now. There are some people, some students here who are trying to start a journal on criminal law and incarceration. There are people in this room who are going to lead a workshop in the community about prison abolition. There are people in this room who have known about your case longer than other people in this room have even been alive. So it's a very intergenerational room. If you can close off by explaining a little bit about the piece of art that you have with 3 generations of prisoners and its relation to your thinking about prisons in America, and just going along with that, how that inspired some of your painting. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say to each of you who are attending, each one teach one. Those of you who are older and have more knowledge of what's going on, teach the youngsters coming up about this because this is historical. I mean, these modern day plantations that were on are part of yesteryear. You know, but as James Baldwin said, as I said at that event for definitely focus at the fundraising event, as James Baldwin said, history is not a dead thing. We carry it with us. You know, it is this modern day prison industrial complex. This mass incarceration comes from back in the day when we had plantations. They went from private plantations to public plantations. So anybody who has any knowledge about these, teach the youngsters coming up, because if you don't teach them, then they might fall victim to this place. You know, you heard from the pipeline from schools to prisons, or from free K to prison.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Now, concerning my painting, 3 generations that I did with Carol, it's basically this. In this prison, there were 3 generations of men. Grandfather, a father, and a son. One of them was on death row, one of them was on general population, and 2 of them were in general population. But we found out about it, and it made me think that they can't be the first 3 generations of the same family that ever been in prison or a chain gang or a plantation. I mean, especially a plantation. So I did a painting based on a chain gang thing, because chain gangs are still relevant today, even though they're from yesteryear. And it was a grandfather, a father, and a son. Meaning, and then I had a little guy in the beginning, he's wondering if that's his future, like what he's looking at. You know, and because the prison industrial complex has played a large part in the destruction of the black family. You know, not just black men, but black women too. So, but it's even bigger than that when you look at the Latino population, or the Native American population, because they're here too. Asians are in here too. So when you look at it like that, you know, and of course there's poor whites up in there. So when you look at it that way, you have to understand that this modern day prison industrial complex has a deep roots in this country. And it is my intention to teach as many people as I can about this stuff. And I hope that people out there will learn about it, because it affects all of us. From the amount of money that they spend in here on the death penalty means they're not putting it in the communities, or putting it in college, or putting it in housing, or putting it wherever it needs to be. They're spending that money on death, not on life. The amount of money they spend in all these, I've been here, 33, 34 years. All the money they spend on me to murder me, they would never give to me as a free person out there in that world. They would never say, here, take this to live on. But they'll spend all that money to murder me, but won't spend all that money on educating me. These people got their priorities messed up. It is up to you, to your generation, to teach the upcoming generation so that they won't fall victim to this. And while I did not know when I was out there all those years ago about this place, I know about it now. And I'm doing my part. And all I can do is respectfully ask each and every one of you to do yours. And that's how we'll win in the long run.
Thank you, Kevin. I think, you know, as we were getting the event ready and walking in, the Kavanaugh vote came down, and you know, the Senate voted him in to be a justice in the highest court of the land. And I think that knowing that was going on while you were preparing to speak to all of us, and how you are fighting and how you're asking each of us to do our part, it's just like times are very brutal right now, and they're very trying, and people leaders like you, I think, are more than an inspiration, you are showing us and teaching us how to really use the resources that we have to make sure that a lot of these acts of violence that the state's perpetuating aren't done in the future. And you're really making us chase and fight and run and hopefully win all of the futures that you believe in. So thank you so much, Kevin. And someone wanted to give a closing statement, which is that if even one innocent person is executed on death row, that itself would fit a major crime. And so if we think about it, society is acting criminally. And so that's even more of a reason for why the system is broken and not working. So thank you so much for being here today, and you should definitely close it out and let us all give you a big round of applause.
Hey, thank all of you very much, and understand this before I hang up. That this country, innocence in this country makes no difference to the powerful. This country was stolen from innocent people. They enslaved innocent people. You know, they did all types of stuff and all doing all types of stuff to innocent people. So innocence, in and of itself, doesn't mean anything. In fact, the late United States Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia said that it's not written in the Constitution that an innocent person cannot be executed. As long as that innocent person had a fair trial. These people are more concerned with the process or the procedures than they are with the facts. And that's what just happened with Kavanaugh. They gave an an FBI investigation with no substance. It looks good on paper, but in reality, they didn't do no investigation at all. So with these few things said, man, I'd like to wish everybody peace and solidarity and keep up the good fight, because I am. Peace out. Bye-bye.
You've heard a little bit about why the team is, sorry.
This is the painting that the question is referring to.
And there's also food and drinks that people, I know it may have been tough to eat or drink during the call, but.
Just so you know, that the defense team has made a commitment to Kevin and to ourselves that even if the worst should happen, if we're not successful, and Kevin has to make that walk down to the execution room again for the final time, we've all made a commitment that we're going to stay with his case until we've actually established his innocence, which we think we're very, very close to doing. But let me back up for a minute and get into the details of the case, because I know you law students are interested in some of the legal intricacies of the case, what went wrong and why it went wrong, and I'll try to run through it real quickly. One of the big questions that has always existed in this case is, why would anyone, Kevin or the real killers, why would they kill this family? What was the motive? And for almost 18 years, the answer to that question was pretty elusive. Back in about 2012, I guess it was, we discovered some newspaper articles and magazine articles dealing with the last man executed in California, Clarence Ray Allen, who was executed in 2006. And in reading those articles, we discovered that Clarence Ray Allen dabbled in raising and selling and stealing Arabian horses. Doug and Peggy Ryan had an Arabian horse farm, and were in the business of training and showing Arabian horses. So that caught our attention. But even then, that didn't establish a motive. But what we found was that we heard from Peggy Ryan's sister that they had sold an Arabian horse to an individual. She didn't know who it was, but they had sold a horse, and there was some question about whether proper payment had been made, and ultimately the horse was repossessed. Didn't know who it was that was on the other end of that. But then, based on that, I went and interviewed 2 ex-wives of Clarence Ray Allen over in Fresno and Bakersfield. And they said, you know, we don't know the details, but there was a situation where Mr. Allen had acquired a former champion Arabian horse, and it had been repossessed, and he was as angry as anyone had ever seen him over that. Starts getting a little bit closer in terms of motivation. I'll come back to that. Getting back to the night of the murders, and this is where things start going wrong in the investigation. If I could digress for just a minute, Kevin said something, and it stuck with me here for the last couple of minutes, about the FBI investigation of Judge Kavanaugh. Let me tell you, as someone who has supervised those investigations, they're called special inquiries, as someone who has conducted them, investigated them as an agent, that FBI investigation was absolutely a disgrace for the FBI. Among the ex-agents, we have an internet network that we stay in touch. I have never seen that network so on fire as it has been the last couple of days. And I don't think we've heard the end of it, but I just, it appears that there was, for one of the very first times, very, very not good political influence on the FBI in terms of restricting that. So keep an eye on it. Anyway, backing up to the murder case, at about 11 o'clock p.m., the night of the murders, 3 individuals show up at a little country western bar about a mile from the murder scene. They said this was all a rural area. They show up, they're all high, apparently high on drugs, at least that's what a lot of people in the bar said. They got so rowdy, they got tossed out, left, and everybody thought that was the end of it. Well, about 1:45, a few hours later, the 3 individuals show back up again. 2 of them are wearing coveralls, and one of them goes up to 3 women that are in the bar and starts hitting on the lady, trying to convince her to get up and dance and what have you. And she happens to be a phlebotomist, and she looks at 2 of these individuals in the coveralls, and the coveralls are splattered with blood up and down. And she said, "Do you realize that you're covered in blood?" And this one individual screams out an expletive and grabs the other 2, and they go running out the back door of the bar. Again, they were even higher than they were a couple of hours earlier. The bouncer in the bar follows them out, sees them get into a white station wagon with wood paneling on the side and a black luggage rack on top. The Ryans owned an identical car, which was missing when the police arrived next morning. The killers stole the car. So anyway, they see the 3 individuals get into the car and leave. About 6 or 7 hours later, a woman driving down a main street in the Claremont-Pomona area is almost hit by a car or driving recklessly with 3 individuals in it, a white station wagon, wood paneling on the side, a luggage rack. She's with her grandmother, who writes down the license number, saying that, you know, they ought to be reported to the police. A couple hours later, they hear on the news that the Ryan, the victim family, had been killed, and they hear that their station wagon is missing, and the police are looking for it, and they give the license number. They realize the car they saw, the license number they wrote down, is the Ryan's car. 6 days later, that car is found parked in a church parking lot in Long Beach. And interestingly about where it was found, Kevin really didn't even know where Long Beach was. But an individual who later became a major suspect in this case, his stepmother lived about a mile down the main street from where this car was dumped. When I say he later became a subject, or suspect, now a subject of the case, at about 3:30, a man by the name of Lee Furl, I'm not giving out any secrets here, his name's been all over the news, a convicted murderer, showed up at a house in a little suburb of San Bernardino, where he was living with a girlfriend. When he had left home earlier in the evening, he had been wearing Levi's and a tan t-shirt. He was supposed to meet her at a country western music festival, but he didn't show up at it. But he shows up back home at about 3:30, wearing blood-spattered coveralls and missing the tan t-shirt that he had worn earlier in the evening. She reports it to the next morning. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself again. He's in a panic state, comes in, he says he's got to get out of town, sheds the coveralls, washes up, puts on some new clothes, goes outside, gets on a motorcycle with a girlfriend, another girlfriend, and someone else in the house looks out and sees them right off on the motorcycle, along with a white station wagon with wood paneling on the side and the luggage rack on top. This is between the sighting later in the morning and the time of the murders. When this woman hears on the news about 6 hours later about the murders, she remembers all of this, calls the police, and she goes in the bedroom where he changed clothes, and there are the bloody coveralls. She picks them up, takes them up front, waits for the police to arrive. They collect those bloody coveralls as evidence. She tells them that her boyfriend is a convicted murderer. He had strangled and dismembered a 17-year-old girl and served 5 years in prison because he turned state's evidence against Clarence Ray Allen, the last man that was executed in California. So you see how the pieces start fitting together even more. The police do absolutely nothing. They don't follow up on it. They don't try to interview him. They don't try to track him down. They don't do anything. And in fact, the night, well, Kevin Cooper is arrested 6 weeks later. And when they have the preliminary hearing, which you all know what that is, the night before the preliminary hearing, the police take those coveralls out of the evidence room, throw them in a dumpster behind the police station, and they disappear. They did not want any evidence of other people than Kevin Cooper. They had found out 2 days after the murders that Kevin had walked away from Chino State Prison. And the sheriff, Floyd Tidwell at the time, who's retired now, goes on the news and says, "We've identified the killer. We know who he is, black man named such and such." They had not one iota of evidence at that time. But there was a great deal of very subtle racism and some not so subtle out in that area at that time. The Ku Klux Klan rolled out with their hoods and everything. Once they had identified Kevin as their prime suspect, and it just went downhill from there. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here a little bit, but the tan t-shirt that I mentioned. That tan t-shirt was found in a very unusual way. 2 days after the murder, a woman is out walking near the country western bar, walking her dog, rural area, and she looks over the side of the road, and there's a blue shirt with blood on it laying alongside the road. She calls the police, they come out, they pick up the blue shirt. The next day, they come out with a whole group of reserve deputy sheriffs with law enforcement explorer scouts, and they walk this road for about a half a mile in either direction. And about a quarter of a mile down the road, on the other side of the road, they find a tan t-shirt laying there that had blood on it. They collect that. Now think about it. There's a blue shirt and a tan t-shirt indicating most likely two individuals from the country western bar getting rid of shirts. When you look at where they were found, obviously one was thrown out on one side of the car as it's driving away, and the other is thrown out on the other side of the car as it's driving away. What do they do with that evidence? Nothing. They keep the tan t-shirt, but the blue t-shirt, the blue shirt, blood spattered, mysteriously disappears, and they claim it never existed, that there was only one shirt, the tan shirt. But an enterprising investigator back at that time, working for the defense, goes in and reviews police records, and he finds where the blue shirt was logged in. And they claim, again, the police claim that was a mistake. that there was no blue shirt. The blue shirt disappears, the coveralls disappear. The only evidence really at that time indicating there were at least 2, probably 3 people involved. I forgot to mention when the coroner came out to the murder scene and took a look at it, took a preliminary look at the wounds, his opinion was there were at least 2 and probably 3 people involved in the murders because of all the different weapons and the different wounds that had occurred. But at that point, they are so focused on Kevin Cooper, an African American in a somewhat racist community who had walked away from prison. Something set in that in legal terms is called confirmation bias. Police work would call it tunnel vision. The whole investigation just went into a funnel, and the only thing they were looking at was finding the evidence that was going to convict Kevin Cooper. That's the opposite of the way it's done. You take the evidence to lead you to who did it, not take your subject and then find the evidence to fit in. And it really just kind of goes downhill from there with evidence disappearing. Getting back to the house that Kevin hid out in, 3 days after the murder, the owner of that house has heard about the murders. He comes out there, gets a hold of the deputies that are still working the murder scene, and says, you might want to have somebody go over and look at my house. It's been empty, and maybe the killers were there, who knows. They send 2 detectives over. They go through the house, they search it, they find absolutely nothing. 2 days later, the lead detective asks one of the reserve deputies at the scene, who is also a full-time employee of the prison, if he would go back to the prison and get a jacket that the prisoners normally wear and get a pair of tennis shoes that are issued to the prisoners. He does. He brings them back. Lo and behold, the next day, 2 other detectives are asked to go back and search the house where they thought Kevin was hiding. This time, they find a green button from a green prison jacket laying right out in plain view on the carpeted floor of the master bedroom. Okay. Next to that is an axe sheath, a hatchet sheath, laying there, a leather one. There's no mention of them. The detectives who went through the first time said they weren't there, and obviously they were planted. The one problem there was the detectives that asked that reserve deputy to go get those items did not know that Kevin was wearing a tan uniform and a tan jacket, not a green jacket. They got the wrong color. And then with the tennis shoes that he brought back, the next day, tennis shoe prints and blood start to be discovered around the crime scene that weren't there before at all. I mentioned 6 days later, they found the station wagon in Long Beach. When they found it, if they had done the work they should have done in the beginning when they found out about the guy, Lee Furl, dumping these bloody coveralls, and where they found the car, a good detective would have started looking, why is that car there? And if they knew about Furl, they would have discovered his stepmother was a mile down the street, who had a long criminal record herself. The theory that they took in the case in charging Kevin was that as an escapee, he had no money. And the reason he killed the Ryans was to steal money and credit cards or whatever they needed to make his getaway. The problem with that theory was there was money laying out on the kitchen counter, there were credit cards there, her purse was there that had money in it. It didn't make any sense. The other thing they said was that Kevin obviously had to steal their car to make his getaway. Well, the problem with that is, as Kevin has reminded me many, many times, he's an old car thief. He knows how to steal a car. Plus, he had passed, after leaving the prison, he had passed probably 20 or 30 cars parked that he easily could have stolen. The other problem was, it was a ranch. They left their keys in the car. Nobody took the keys in the house. He didn't have to go in the house to kill people to steal the car. Another interesting aspect is they claim to have found blood in the shower in the house where Kevin had hidden out that first night. They did it with what's called a luminol test. That's a chemical that will detect the presence of human blood. But when luminol detects that, there's a second test you have to do to confirm that it is in fact human blood. They didn't do that second test. They just based it on the fact that the luminol reacted. The problem is that that shower had been cleaned 3 or 4 days before the murders by the woman who moved out with ammonia, I believe it was. It was a normal cleaning chemical, which is about the only chemical that will cause luminol to react as if it was human blood. If they had done the second test, which certainly, as experienced detectives, they would have known it had to be done, they would have discovered that it was not human blood. But they went forward with that theory. Getting back to the car, when they found the car in the church parking lot, they searched it, they wrote a report, they took pictures, nothing of evidentiary value there. So they load the car up, they take it back out to the sheriff's office in San Bernardino County, and there they decide to do a more thorough search. They go get a search warrant, which they really didn't need at that point. They go get a search warrant, and they search the car again. Lo and behold, they find cigarette butts in the ashtray. They find cigarette tobacco, roll your own tobacco, on the floor between the front passenger seat and the door, a space of about 3 inches. And it was obvious from the way the tobacco was laying there, it had been dumped, it had not fallen out of a cigarette or anything like that. Then they seized the butts in the ashtray, which weren't there when the car was recovered. Those cigarettes become evidence later on. And when their crime lab guy in San Bernardino County examines those, he said they contain the blood type of Kevin Cooper. They didn't have DNA testing back then in the 80s. They belonged to Kevin Cooper. At 2 or 3 points, the cigarette papers from those butts became important items of evidence in preparing for trial and what have you. Each time this crime lab examined them and claimed it was Kevin Cooper, well, let me say the first time, when he came back and said it was Kevin Cooper's blood type, there was a time about a year later where they needed to get back into those papers again, but the crime lab claimed that they'd been consumed. They were gone the first time. Well, several months after that, the prosecution needs to bring up these cigarette papers. And mysteriously, they find them. Only this time, the paper is bigger than was the one they tested the first time, and it's a different color. And that even happens one more time a couple of years later. And it was very obvious that something was wrong here in their crime lab, in addition to their homicide investigation aspect. The other part of this is when DNA became available in the mid to late 90s for this investigating purpose. The defense got a court order, a very laborious process. They got a court order to get the tan T-shirt out that was still in evidence and have that tested for DNA. So they do that. They cut little swatches out of the T-shirt and they sent them off to 3 DNA experts around the country, including one down at Scripps Institute in San Diego. And all 3 of them find that the swatches have blood on them that have been tentatively identified as Kevin's blood and Kevin's DNA. But there's one problem. They all contain major amounts of a chemical called EDTA, which is the preservative. When you donate blood or give blood, if you notice a little substance down at the bottom of the tube, part of that is EDTA. It's a preservative. Well, they claim that the blood that they had maintained in the lab since Kevin had been arrested, that they used as the control to say that this was Kevin's. When they went and checked that tube, the defense investigator went and checked that blood vial. They found that in that vial was not only the presence of EDTA, but in that blood vial were 2 different blood types, 2 different DNA types mixed together. You remember the old trick, and maybe some of you are still young enough that you've done this, where when you were a kid and you got into your parents' liquor bottles,
Yeah.
and you took some out, you had to fill it up with something to make it look full again.
Yeah.
Well, that's obviously what had been done with the blood vial. The lab guy, the same lab guy, had taken blood out, and he put it on the T-shirt for it to be tested. And this is where they said, okay, now this is Kevin's DNA. They discovered the EDTA. But the interesting part of that was that blood wasn't there in the photos when they recovered the tan T-shirt. You know, not only were they corrupt, they were pretty stupid too in doing that. And interestingly, the Scripps guy that did it, who was one of the testers of this, did it in the name of the Scripps Institute. And it turns out Scripps Institute does not allow that kind of testing. He did this on his own. And then he tried to cover up afterwards that he had done it. And he tried to offer an explanation that the EDTA was a result of contamination in his own lab. Well, the thing about Scripps Institute, it's one of the leading laboratories in the country. They have such stringent contamination preventative measures that they've advised us there's no way that there was excessive EDTA that could have contaminated this. And the last thing is in the hallway of the house, where there was no other blood around, lo and behold, right down near the floorboard is a blood drop known as A41, the infamous blood drop, that the same lab guy that had done this other work claims to have found there, tested it, and it's Kevin Cooper's blood. Trouble with that is that one also gets consumed every time they test it, but shows up again. So that's another piece of again, of the corruption that was going on there. In terms of the case going to trial, much of this, much of the evidence that they had gotten rid of, the defense was never told about. And they tried to cleanse the records of any of that. But in these situations, that kind of stuff always comes out at some point. Sooner or later, it comes out, and it did. The defense was not told about the coveralls. They were not told about the blue shirt. They were told the phony stories about the cigarettes, the cigarette papers, what have you. When this came to the attention of the defense attorney at the time, who was a county public defender, not only did he not question any of the evidence, not only did he not put on any alternative witnesses or alternative theories or any evidence pointing out that this was potentially corrupt investigation, he just let it ride. The other side of that coin is the prosecutors, who were very, very close to this case, obviously knew all of this information about the phony stuff in the lab and the fraudulent testing and the fraudulent disappearance of evidence and what have you. And these are the things that we're asking for in the clemency petition. The ability to collect and compare DNA today is so far beyond what the capabilities were back then. Today, one of the real hot areas is called touch DNA. When you're wearing a blouse or a shirt, you may not realize it, but your body is depositing literally thousands of epithelial skin cells, microscopic, that you can't even see them with the naked eye. But the state of the DNA art or science today is that those cells can be lifted and DNA can be extracted from them. I had the pleasure of interviewing the people in the Netherlands, a husband and wife team that actually designed the process to doing that. And they think this case is a perfect example of how that touch DNA can be tested. So these are the things we're asking for in the clemency petition. We're asking for all that blood evidence to be retested and done the right way this time. And if that tends to show that Kevin Cooper, that that's not his DNA, then the next step is we want an innocence hearing that the governor can grant to let this stuff get out and really get into the court record, and then the governor can then make his decision as to what he wants to do next. We haven't asked for a pardon. We haven't asked for anything beyond just this testing and the innocence hearing. And unfortunately, Governor Brown, as Kevin said, has sat in his chair there and done absolutely nothing. In fact, some of the indications that we're getting back is he's never even read the clemency petition.
Why? Why?
That's a good question. We don't know.
You can't answer him, I mean, just call him on the phone and say what?
No. So many people have talked to him about it, and there's no valid answer that comes out. He really just, he avoids answering the question. And it's amazing, you know. Some of you here are too young, but the first time Brown was governor of the state, he was so vocally against the death penalty. And that's what he became known for.
Moonbeam.
Governor Moonbeam, yeah. But up to now, he's had no explanation at all. After Nick Kristoff's article came out, he sent a letter, Kevin mentioned, he sent a letter to Norm Heil, the attorney, the governor's office did, asking for answers to a series of questions. And he gave the prosecution a tremendous amount of time to give some explanations behind those questions, but a very short time to the defense to provide the answers that he was asking the defense team for. It was obviously a stalling tactic, and a stalling tactic that would get through to the end of his term, at the end of December, that he doesn't have to make a decision. So that's the great unknown. I mean, that's a tremendous question. We don't know. But it's the fact is, that's what it is.
Well, then, okay, if Gavin's going to be the new governor, so he looks like he is, can we get to him now?
That's in process.
Okay.
So anyway, in a nutshell, that's the case. Oh, one last thing. We went out and interviewed some of the jurors from 35 years ago. And 6 of them have written letters that if they had known any of this information about the missing evidence, about the fraudulent lab work, about the coveralls or whatever, 6 of them would not have voted for guilt. 6 of them would not have voted for the death penalty. And they were astonished when this information was related to them. So to boil it down, we are absolutely convinced, we are absolutely committed to the fact that Kevin is an innocent man sitting on death row who came within 3 hours of execution, and there, but for the grace of God, he could have gone. And that's why we're committed to the case. The other issue in here, and I glossed over, is there's a huge ineffective assistance of counsel argument in this too, from the way the defense attorney handled it. Interestingly, under state law, any homicide case, any capital case requires 2 defense attorneys. There has to be a main and then a second chair. He refused to have a second chair. And his excuse for the ineffective defense that he provided was that he didn't need a second chair. He was experienced enough to handle it. But then when all of this came back to haunt him afterwards, he said, well, he was just so overwhelmed, he didn't have time to really look into all of this. If he had the second chair, you know, again, this may not have happened. So anyway, just to wrap up, as we heard, Kevin is sitting there on death row. He's been there for more than half of his life. He's still at risk of execution if these moratoriums get lifted, if Prop 66 is finally, the door is opened. We run the risk of him being executed before we can get through this legal process. We hope that it doesn't happen, and we're committed to not letting it happen, but we're staying after it. Here's the question. With so many people working hard to frame Kevin, it begs the question, why are so many people working to protect the murderer? That's a good question. And I kind of glossed over that because this is still in the works. But the individual that I mentioned earlier, Lee Furrow, if some of you have seen the Nick Kristoff article, there's a picture of Furrow in there. His eyes are blocked out. But he, about a month after the murders, he was talking to a female friend and actually confessed to her his role in the murders. She was scared to death of him. She never reported it, and nobody knew it. It's been about 6 months now. I had talked to her several times over the years that we've been involved in the case, and she called me. She got my name, she called me, and she says, you need to come out and talk to me. So I did immediately. I jumped in the car and went out there. And she related the confession that Lee Furrow had made to her, where it was, the details of it, that all clicked just exactly with what we knew about the case. And she gave a signed, sworn statement. Obviously, we're protecting her identity, where she is and who she is, because he would know immediately if he heard the details. Shortly after, well, the other thing that he did in the confession, he tells who the two other people were. They are people that we knew about, that were close to him, including one woman who was into satanic cult, religious cult stuff. If you remember where the bodies were positioned, their ties were right in. And another person who we're still looking into, but instead of 3 men, it turns out that it's a man and 2 women. And they are all linked together in this case. So, and this is again, I'm not talking out of school, this is in stuff to the governor's office and whatever. So the bottom line is, I went back to Philadelphia a couple of months ago to confront Lee Furrow, the real killer, and see what the reaction would be. And he agreed to be interviewed. He sat there for 2.5 hours and lied. He even lied about what he told the police when they finally did interview him a year after the murders. I never told them that. But the bottom line to this thing was, and I tell you, I fell out of my chair. I asked him for a DNA sample because nobody had it. And he said, okay. Fortunately, I brought DNA kits with me to collect it, and we got it. So we're just waiting now for the governor to give us access to the evidence so that we can test it. He knows all this, by the way. Again, there's no secrets being given out here. But as you can see, it's a very complex case. It's a very convoluted case. It's a very corrupt case. I went and interviewed the sheriff, Floyd Tidwell, who was the sheriff at the time and was really the architect of this corruption. He sat there in his kitchen and talked to him about the case. And I said, at one point I asked him a question. His response was, there is no doubt in my mind that Kevin Cooper is a cold-blooded killer who killed these people. And I said, well, Floyd, how do you know that? And he said, because we found Kevin's palm prints and fingerprints all over the inside of their house. No palm prints, no fingerprints over the inside of the house, nothing. Yes, sir?
The New York Times article talking about a child, the survivor,
yes,
identifying someone else.
Yes. Josh, when he was in the hospital, I'm sorry, sometimes it's hard to keep all these little pieces in the proper order. When Josh was in the hospital, about 3 or 4 days afterwards, it comes on the TV, a picture of Kevin Cooper, the fact that he's wanted for the murder, that he walked away from the prison. Josh sees it, tells the doctor and the detective who's sitting with him, that's not him. It was 3 white men, 3 white or Mexican men. It wasn't him. It wasn't a black man.
What about the women?
Nothing about the women. We didn't know about the women until the confession.
I mean, Josh didn't mention women?
No. 3 men.
3 white people dressed in overalls made it look like that.
Well, it turns out that one of the women has a very masculine appearance. Okay, and the other woman is of Mexican heritage, which kind of ties in with white or Mexican. So anyway, the theory all along had been, the alternate theory was it was 3 white men until that confession came in. Since then, we have found a witness that one of the women told a boyfriend that she was living with about the murders 10 years previously. And the information she gives corroborates Lee Furrow's confession. So we got those 2. And then we just recently identified the 3rd woman. And we're looking into that. But, yes, sir.
Didn't the phlebotomist say that it was 3 men?
She did, but when we talked to her, she backed off a little bit. She thought it was 3 men. The only one she really dealt with was the one guy, Lee Furrow. Carol?
In Patrick O'Connor's book, Scapegoat, he mentions the names of 3 men. And I think he said one of them has died.
Well,
I don't know.
He did. I don't believe he mentioned the names of 3 men. He mentioned a couple of other people that were kind of on the fringes of the state, but we've marked that out, that it just didn't happen.
What is Lee Farrell doing? Is he in jail?
No, he's walking the streets of Philadelphia for a little while longer. Yes, sir.
Also, if sometimes people are identified by what they're wearing. So if they're wearing something that usually men wear, it's easy to make that, decision in your mind,
Yeah, we're working on getting pictures of what they look like back then, 35 years ago.
The other thing that disturbs me, it seems like was a lot of evidence that turned up missing. If it's logged in, it shouldn't be missing.
Well, it's missing because they took it out and threw it away.
Yeah, I know.
That's why it's missing.
But that is itself should, change the outcome of the trial. They shouldn't base the trial on that.
It was never, those items being found and being missing were never disclosed to the defense. It was a clear Brady violation. That's exactly what it was. So anyway, that's the story. We feel that Kevin's innocent. We're going to prove it, and we're going to stick with it until it's proven. And he deserves it. I think Josh, the surviving son, deserves to know the truth. He won't talk to us right now because he thinks Kevin did it. And third, the criminal justice system deserves for this wrong to be righted. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming. If you can please sign the petition, and then if you can try and get the word out about Kevin Cooper. Their public pressure is part of why the governor sent the letter to the legal team, probably. So we need as many people as we can sharing his op-eds, sharing the article about him. Please help get the word out. And then finally, Esteban, who's been filming this for us, has an Immigration Solidarity in Latin America event coming up on October 20th. There's going to be a documentary that he's worked on about immigration and a panel. And as we know, the immigration system and the prison system very much come from the same, they're poisonous fruit of the same tree. So please come to that. It's on the 20th at 7 p.m. on 518 Valencia. So thank you so much for coming.